Welcome to the chilling world of every photo taken in this hotel has one extra person, a spine-tingling tale that will grip your mind and make you question the very nature of the world around you. Have you ever wondered what secrets might be hidden in the walls of an old, seemingly innocent hotel? What if every time you stepped in front of the camera, something or someone else joined the frame? That's exactly what happened to a group of unsuspecting visitors who checked into the haunted Holloway Hotel. They thought they were simply capturing memories, but soon realized they were documenting something far more sinister. In this story, every photo tells a story, and every smile hides a secret, an extra, invisible presence that may not be as invisible as it seems. What would you do if you noticed that every picture taken in a place, no matter how innocuous, had an extra person? Would you run, hide, or uncover the mystery? This is a journey full of eerie events, horrifying revelations, and suspense that will have you looking twice at every snapshot you take. So how would you react? Could it happen to you? If you're intrigued and ready for the haunting suspense to unfold, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this story to keep the chills rolling. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's dive into this spine-chilling saga. The story begins in the early days of the Holloway Hotel, a seemingly charming and beautiful place. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. It was a crisp autumn morning when a group of travelers arrived at the Holloway Hotel. The place looked like something out of a vintage postcard, elegant and grand with its old brick exterior, ivy climbing up the sides, and a beautiful wrought iron gate that creaked every time it was opened. The hotel was nestled in the mountains, far away from the bustling cities, making it the perfect retreat for those looking to escape the noise of everyday life. Maggie, a photographer who loved exploring abandoned buildings and forgotten places, was the first to step through the door. She had always been fascinated by the mysterious side of life, and something about this place intrigued her. She checked in with a polite but distant receptionist, who handed her a brass key with a little number 2. Maggie barely noticed the receptionist's unnerving gaze as she grabbed her bags and headed toward her room. The lobby was empty, save for the grand chandelier hanging above. Maggie ran her fingers along the smooth marble counter, her mind already imagining how this place would look in a black and white photo. She wanted to capture its haunting beauty, its eerie quietness. Her first moments in the hotel were uneventful. She unpacked her things, set up her camera, and began snapping pictures. The room had an old-world charm, a large four-poster bed, thick curtains that blocked the afternoon sun, and antique furniture that creaked under the weight of history. Everything felt still, as though the room had been preserved in time, never touched by modernity. Maggie knew this was going to be a great shoot. She lined up a few shots, adjusting the lighting, and took a series of photos. When she looked through the viewfinder of her camera, she frowned. In every shot, there was an extra figure standing behind her. At first, she assumed it was a trick of the light or a blur from the motion of her hand. But no, each image clearly showed a tall, dark shape standing in the background of the photo. It wasn't just a shadow or an anomaly. It was a distinct figure, with its own features, albeit hard to make out. It had the shape of a person, but something was off. Its outline was blurred, as though it didn't belong. Confused but intrigued, Maggie stepped closer to the photos on her camera's display. The figure looked vaguely human, but the facial features were indistinct, just a blur. Her heart began to race. Was this some kind of optical illusion? A reflection from an unseen mirror? But there were no mirrors in the room. And why was it only appearing in the photos? She shrugged it off as a malfunction with the camera. Maybe it was time to check out the rest of the hotel. She needed a break, and the mystery of the extra person in her photos had already begun to gnaw at her. As she walked down the hallway toward the stairs, she noticed an old portrait hanging on the wall. An oil painting of a man in a dark suit, standing against the same ivy-covered backdrop she had seen when she first entered. The eyes of the man in the painting seemed to follow her as she moved past, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She couldn't explain it, but the air in the hotel had started to feel thicker, heavier. Every creak of the floorboards under her feet seemed louder than usual, and the building seemed to be alive with whispers. It was at that moment that Maggie noticed something strange. The receptionist who had been behind the desk earlier was now standing at the end of the hallway staring at her. She was dressed in the same uniform, but her face had changed. The smile she had earlier seemed cold now, her eyes dark, almost too dark. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The receptionist didn't move as Maggie approached, but as she passed, Maggie caught a glimpse of her name tag, Ivy. Her stomach twisted. Something about Ivy's presence felt off. Ignoring the unsettling feeling, Maggie continued her exploration of the hotel, snapping more photos as she went. She explored the main hall, the dining area, and the old library. Each room seemed to be more ancient and full of forgotten memories than the last. But wherever she went, that same figure appeared in the background of her photos. She couldn't deny it now. It wasn't just a malfunction. Something was in the hotel, and it was in every shot she took. Her unease grew with each new picture. She felt as if someone or something was watching her every move. It wasn't until later that evening, when Maggie went to dinner in the hotel's dining room, that she met the other. A family of 3 sat at the table next to hers, a father, mother, and their teenage daughter. They were laughing and chatting, seemingly unaffected by the strange atmosphere of the hotel. Maggie couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They mentioned they were here for a weekend getaway, hoping to enjoy the peaceful surroundings and capture some memories. As if on cue, the daughter, a girl around 16, pulled out a camera from her bag. "We should get a photo together," she said excitedly. "This place looks so vintage." Maggie smiled faintly. "I wouldn't mind joining you for a shot, if you don't mind. I'm a photographer." The family agreed, and soon they were all posing for a photo. With Maggie in the frame, the daughter counted down, 3, 2, the camera clicked, and the moment was frozen in time. But as Maggie looked at the picture on the camera screen, her heart stopped. The same dark figure, blurry, indistinct, but unmistakable, was standing just behind the father. She blinked, looked at the photo again, but the figure was still there. It had joined the shot, and this time it was closer. Too close. Maggie's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the photo, her fingers trembling slightly around the camera. The figure, tall, dark, and impossibly out of place, was now standing right behind the father, who was smiling, completely unaware. Maggie's breath hitched. She'd never been a superstitious person, but the more she looked at the photo, the more she felt that creeping sensation, the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. She quickly glanced up from the camera, meeting the eyes of the family across the table. They were all still smiling, none of them noticing the figure in the photo. The daughter, a young girl with bright blue eyes and a cascade of blonde hair, was laughing at some joke her mother had made. The father gave Maggie a friendly wave, oblivious to the strange presence in the background. "Did you get a good one?" the mother asked, her voice warm and cheerful. "Yeah, it looks great," Maggie managed to respond, forcing a smile. But inside, her mind was racing. What was happening? Why did this thing keep appearing in her photo? Feeling a wave of unease, Maggie stood up from the table. She needed space, needed to figure out what was going on. "I think I'll take a walk around the grounds," she said quickly, her voice shaking. The family gave her a friendly nod, still engrossed in their conversation, and she slipped away before they could say more. Outside, the crisp night air hit her face, sharp and cold, and she breathed deeply to calm her nerves. The hotel loomed behind her, its windows dark and silent. The figure in the photo was still fresh in her mind, its distorted form haunting her every thought. Could she have imagined it? Maybe it was just a coincidence, something her mind had conjured up in the moment. But then she remembered the other photos she'd taken, the ones from her room. The figure had appeared there too, standing just beyond her line of sight, always blurry, always in the background. Could it be a ghost, a trick of light, or something far worse? Maggie walked slowly along the gravel path, trying to clear her head. The night was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant howl of a wolf. The air was thick with fog, swirling around her legs as she moved deeper into the hotel's overgrown garden. The space was dark, the path lit only by old lanterns that flickered intermittently. It was the perfect setting for a haunting, a place that felt both beautiful and cursed. As she walked, her mind drifted back to the portrait in the hallway. The man in the painting, she had only caught a glimpse of it, but his eyes, those eyes had been unsettling. They were too intense, too alive. She had felt a strange pull when she passed by it, as though the painting was watching her, waiting for something. The more she thought about it, the more she became convinced that there was something wrong with the hotel, something wrong with its past. Perhaps it was haunted, as some whispered rumors claimed, but haunted by what? Who was that figure in her photos? And why was it following her every step? Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she spun around, but there was no one there. Just the dense fog and the silence of the night. Maggie stood frozen for a moment, her breath shallow. Was she imagining things? She glanced nervously around the garden, but there was no sign of anyone. Then, without warning, she heard the soft click of a camera shutter, a familiar sound, one that sent chills down her spine. She whipped around again, expecting to see someone with a camera. But again there was nothing, only the mist, curling around the garden like a sinister fog. Her pulse quickened, and she began walking faster, trying to shake off the mounting sense of dread that clung to her. She needed to get back to her room. She needed to get away from this place. But as she hurried back toward the hotel, she noticed something that made her stop dead in her tracks. The front door, which had been closed when she left, was now ajar. Just a crack, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through her. She hadn't seen anyone around since she'd left the dining room. Had someone entered her room while she was gone? The thought made her stomach drop. Maggie had always been cautious, always aware of her surroundings. But now, she wasn't so sure. She hesitated for a moment, then steeled herself. Whatever was going on, whatever was haunting the hotel, she had to face it. She had to know what was happening. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped into the lobby. The eerie silence enveloped her once again, as though the hotel was holding its breath, waiting. But as she crossed the threshold, something made her freeze. A figure stood at the reception desk. It was Ivy, the receptionist, her face hidden in shadow. Her back was turned, but Maggie could see the familiar brass key in her hand, the same key that Maggie had received when she checked in. "I've been waiting for you," Ivy said softly, without turning around. Maggie's throat went dry. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ivy slowly turned to face her, her lips curling into a smile, but it wasn't a smile that made Maggie feel at ease. It was a twisted, knowing grin. "Every guest who stays here," Ivy said slowly, her voice low and haunting, "sees the figure eventually. You'll see it again. You can't escape it." Maggie felt her blood run cold. "Who? What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ivy's smile widened, and she took a slow step toward her. "It's been here long before you, Maggie. It's always watching, always waiting." Maggie's heart raced. She wanted to run, to escape, but she couldn't. Her legs felt like they were made of stone. The hotel, the air, even Ivy's gaze, it all seemed to be closing in on her. Suddenly, Ivy's smile disappeared. Her eyes locked onto Maggie's with a deep intensity. "You're not the first to be haunted by it," she whispered, "and you won't be the last." Before Maggie could respond, the front door slammed shut behind. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the Holloway Hotel like a thunderclap. Maggie's heart raced as she spun around, her eyes wide in panic. The lobby, once serene, now felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the eerie fog outside had seeped in, curling under the cracks of the old wooden door like a living thing. Maggie's breath hitched, and her hands trembled as she gripped the camera tightly. Her mind raced to make sense of everything that was happening. Ivy, the receptionist, was standing there, her face shrouded in shadows, her expression unreadable, yet unsettling. There was no one else in the lobby, no sound except for Maggie's own breathing and the distant creaking of the hotel's ancient bones. I don't understand," Maggie stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean I'm not the first?" Ivy's smile slowly returned, but it wasn't the same smile Maggie had seen earlier. This one was sinister, filled with a dark knowledge that chilled Maggie to her core. Ivy took a step toward her, her movement slow, deliberate. "Not the first to see him, not the first to be followed," Ivy said, her voice low, almost hypnotic. People come here for rest, for solace, but what they find is far more than they bargained for. Maggie took a shaky step back, instinctively looking around for a way out. But the hotel's high ceilings and vast empty space made her feel trapped. The door had slammed shut on its own, and she had no idea if she could open it again. "I don't understand," Maggie repeated, her voice shaky now, her grip on the camera tightening, as though it could somehow protect her. "Who is this person? Why is he in my photos?" Ivy's gaze never wavered. "The man in the painting," she said softly, almost with reverence. "He was the first to stay here. Decades ago. He came for the same reason you did, seeking peace, seeking comfort, but he never left." Maggie's blood ran cold as she tried to piece it together. The portrait, the one she'd seen earlier in the hallway. The man in the suit, those eyes had felt alive, like they were watching her. Was he the figure in her photos? "Who is he?" Maggie asked again, her voice hoarse, barely able to contain the terror rising inside her. Ivy's smile widened, but it was no longer comforting. It was a knowing, malicious grin. "He was the owner of this hotel, a man named Charles Holloway. But he didn't just own this place. He controlled it. And when he died, he didn't leave. His soul stayed behind, bound to these walls. His presence lingers in every corner of this hotel. And now he's taken an interest in you." Maggie shook her head, disbelief flooding her senses. "What? That doesn't make sense. He can't just be haunting the hotel. You've seen the photos," Ivy interrupted, her voice cutting through Maggie's thoughts. "You've seen him in the background, haven't you? He's always there, lurking, waiting, watching." Maggie felt the blood drain from her face. The photos, every time she looked at them, that dark figure was there, always in the background, always a blur but still present. She had tried to dismiss it, to convince herself it was just a trick of the light, a malfunction, but now it was impossible to ignore. There was something in the hotel, and it was connected to her, to the camera, to the photos. "What do you want from me?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling, barely able to hold back the tears of terror that threatened to spill over. Ivy's expression softened, almost as if pitying Maggie. "He doesn't want anything from you, Maggie. He needs you. He needs someone to notice him again. Someone who can see him. And once you do, once you're aware of him, you can never escape. He'll follow you, haunt you, torment you in every way he can." Maggie's legs felt weak beneath her, her knees threatening to buckle. She glanced toward the door, but it remained firmly shut, the handle unmoving no matter how hard she tried to turn it. She was trapped in this nightmare. Suddenly, Ivy stepped forward, her dark eyes locking onto Maggie's, with a cold intensity. "You're not the first," Ivy repeated, "but you may be the last." The words hung in the air, thick with an unspoken threat. Maggie felt as though the walls of the hotel were closing in on her. The oppressive atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second, the air thick with dread and tension. Every noise seemed amplified, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt through her. She needed to get out. She needed to leave. "I'm getting out of here," Maggie said firmly, her voice shaking but determined. She wasn't going to let this hotel control her. She wasn't going to let some ghost, some ancient presence trap her in this nightmare. She turned on her heel and began to walk toward the door, her hand gripping the handle with desperation. But Ivy's voice stopped her. "You can't leave," she said softly. "Not until he's had his fill." Maggie froze. Her hand lingered on the door handle, but she didn't turn around. "Had his fill? What does that mean?" Ivy didn't respond. She only stood there, watching Maggie with that same unblinking, haunting gaze. Maggie's mind raced. Had his fill? What did that mean? Had Holloway, the spirit, taken something from the others who had stayed here? What had happened to them? Without another word, she threw the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what she expected to find on the other side, but it certainly wasn't. The garden outside had changed. The once foggy, eerie path was now shrouded in complete darkness. The trees that lined the path were twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The hotel, once grand, now looked like a looming, decaying structure, its windows dark and hollow, like empty eyes staring out at her. But it was the silence that struck Maggie the most. The oppressive, suffocating silence that seemed to have fallen over everything. Not a single sound came from the outside world, not even the rustling of leaves or the distant howl of a wolf. Just the void of silence. Maggie stepped outside cautiously, her camera still clutched tightly in her hand. She could feel the weight of the hotel behind her, pressing down on her, its gaze following her every move. Her pulse raced as she took one step, then another, the darkness wrapping around her like a blanket. And that's when she saw it. The figure, the tall, dark shape that had haunted her photos. It was standing at the far end of the garden, barely visible in the gloom, but unmistakable, and it was moving toward her. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she saw the figure moving toward her. The dark shape that had been a constant presence in her photos, the thing that had lurked in the background, was now stepping out from the shadows, approaching her with a slow, deliberate pace. Her hands shook, and the camera slipped from her grip. But she didn't have the courage to let it fall. Every instinct told her to run, but her legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot as the figure drew closer. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its form seemed to flicker in and out of focus, as if it couldn't decide whether it truly belonged to this world. There was no discernible face, only a shadowy blur where its features should have been, but its presence was undeniable, as though the very air around it grew heavier, more suffocating with every passing second. Maggie's heart raced as she tried to back away, but she stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root. She fell hard onto the cold earth, scraping her palms against the rough ground. Pain shot through her, but it was nothing compared to the sheer terror clawing at her chest. She scrambled to her feet, barely able to keep her balance, as she turned toward the hotel, desperate for the safety of the building. But as she took a step toward the door, she heard it, an unsettling sound, a soft whisper, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. She whipped around, her heart thundering in her ears. The figure was now standing right in front of her, blocking her path. It had moved so quickly, too quickly. Her stomach churned with dread. The figure was closer now, so close that she could feel its presence, like a cold wind sweeping over her skin. But there was something else, something more disturbing. The air around her had grown unbearably still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Who are you?" Maggie managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The question felt stupid, the moment it left her lips, but she needed something, anything, to break the suffocating silence. The figure didn't answer. It didn't speak, didn't move. But somehow Maggie felt it more than saw it. It was as if it was inside her mind, wrapping its presence around her thoughts, probing, twisting them. For a long moment she stood frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from the figure. It was not the same as the shadowy blur she had seen in the photos. It was here, in the flesh. And it was real. Suddenly the figure raised its arms slowly. Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she watched it move, its long skeletal fingers stretching toward her. A cold chill ran through her body as it reached out, too slow, too deliberate, as though savoring the moment. Before Maggie could react, a flash of light erupted from behind her. The blinding light was almost painful, but it wasn't the sun. It was the flash of a camera. She turned instinctively toward the source of the light. Standing at the far edge of the garden was the teenage girl from the dining room, the one who had been so eager to take pictures. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, but she was holding her camera, pointing it directly at the figure. Another flash. Another deafening click. "Run," the girl shouted, her voice hoarse. "Get away from it." Maggie didn't need to be told twice. She turned and bolted for the hotel, her breath ragged in her chest. The sound of her pounding footsteps drowned out everything else, her mind screaming at her to move faster, faster. But the hotel seemed so far away now. The figure, whatever it was still behind her. Still there, its presence lingering in the air like a poison. She could feel its weight pressing against her back. And she knew it was close, too close. As she reached the hotel's front steps, She heard the whisper again, soft, insistent, like the rustling of leaves, but this time louder, clearer, almost like a voice. She couldn't make out the words, but it didn't matter. The feeling of being pursued, of being hunted, was overwhelming. She reached for the door, her fingers slipping across the cold metal handle, but when she yanked it open, the door didn't budge. Her breath hitched. Panic set in as she pulled harder, but the door was stuck, as if it had been bolted shut from the other side. No, no, Maggie gasped, desperately pulling on the handle. She banged her fists against the door in a frenzy, her mind racing with the knowledge that she was trapped, locked out with the thing that was hunting her. Behind her the whisper grew louder, more distinct. She turned quickly, her heart hammering in her chest. The figure was standing there, just at the edge of the steps, watching her, its featureless face locked onto hers. In the dim light of the garden, Maggie could see it more clearly now. There was something in its presence, something wrong. It didn't feel like a ghost. It didn't feel like a human being. It was something else, something ancient, something otherworldly. She could hear the camera's shutter clicks again, flash after flash. The girl was still standing there, taking picture after picture, her hands shaking, her eyes locked on the creature. But even though the girl was photographing it, the figure didn't seem to be disappearing. It wasn't afraid of the light, of the camera. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger with each shot. Maggie tried again to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. She turned back to the garden and saw the figure step forward, its long limbs moving like a marionette. It was no longer just standing in the shadows. It was coming toward her slowly, inexorably, with a deliberate, haunting purpose. The girl's voice cut through the tension again. Maggie, you need to get inside. It can't come through the door, you need to close it. The girl's words made something click in Maggie's mind. It was true, the figure hadn't crossed the threshold. The door was the barrier, the line between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But as Maggie reached for the door again, she heard a faint crack, a sound that made her freeze in place. The wood splintering, the door beginning to bend. The hotel was no longer just a hotel. It was becoming a prison. The crack in the door grew louder, splitting the air with a sharp, sickening sound. Maggie's pulse surged in her ears as she stared at the splintering wood, her hands now shaking uncontrollably. She had no idea how much time she had before the door gave way completely. The figure was closing in, its long, twisting shadow creeping closer, its every step a death knell in the quiet, oppressive night. Maggie, close the door. The girl's voice rang out again, desperate and raw. But Maggie couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. The door was her only protection, but the very structure of the hotel itself seemed to be betraying her. The wooden frames shuddered again, the crack widening, the door bending with a dreadful groaning sound. With a gasp, Maggie threw herself at the door one last time, slamming her body against it with all her remaining strength. Her shoulder burned with the impact, but the door did not budge. Behind her she heard the sound of the figure stepping forward, its slow, deliberate movement filling the air with a heaviness that threatened to crush her chest. She didn't need to turn around to know it was right there, just inches away, its dark presence hanging over her like a black cloud. She glanced at the girl, whose camera was still flashing relentlessly. Each flash illuminated the garden, casting harsh shadows against the monstrous shape that now stood just a few feet away. But the flashes had no effect. The figure seemed to flicker with each burst of light, like it was trying to maintain a physical presence in this world, but every time the camera flashed, it grew more distorted, more fragmented. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong anywhere. The girl's panicked voice cut through the thick tension again. Maggie, you have to close it. But how? Her thoughts were racing. Maggie knew there was something to the door, something more than just a physical barrier. Maybe it was the presence of the hotel itself. Maybe this place was a trap, a prison for those who wandered too far into its dark corners. But how could a simple door keep something like that out? With a desperate cry, she twisted the handle again, trying to force it open. The sound of the crack widened as the door buckled, and Maggie felt a chill sweep over her body. The wind picked up in an instant, howling like a beast in the night. It smelled of rot, of decay. The air turned frigid, and Maggie realized that somehow the cold had seeped into her very bones. There was no way out. Maggie, it was the last thing she heard before she felt it. The presence, the suffocating weight of it, pushing against her, pulling at her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She felt the temperature drop as if the very air was being sucked from her lungs. The camera in her hand grew icy cold, as if it had been plucked straight from the heart of winter. In the corner of her eye, she saw it, the figure's face. For a split second, Maggie could have sworn she saw a face form in the blur of shadow. There was a flash of pale skin, eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light, but it was fleeting, barely there. It flickered as if it was something trying to break through, trying to claw its way into the world. It was a distorted reflection of something human, but not quite right, not human at all. A deep, guttural whisper slithered through the air, coming from the figure. "You can't run," Maggie screamed, slamming her body against the door again, her heart hammering in her chest. It was too much. She couldn't breathe. The darkness in front of her pressed against her mind, suffocating her, dragging her under like a tide that wouldn't stop. The door creaked violently as something pushed against it from the other side, and Maggie felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The wind howled louder now, swirling around her in violent gusts. The door was shaking, threatening to snap. She was going to be swallowed by the hotel, consumed by whatever thing had been haunting it for so long. But then the girl was standing there, her camera still aimed at the figure, but her expression was unreadable, distant. She wasn't shaking, wasn't screaming. She was frozen. "What are you doing?" Maggie gasped, trying to breathe through the panic. But the girl didn't answer. She didn't need to. The camera, the flashes, the clicks, they weren't helping. The figure wasn't repelled by the light. It wasn't bound by the camera. Maggie realized it now. The girl was doing the same thing she had done earlier, trying to capture the figure on film. But the more she clicked, the more the creature seemed to gain strength, solidifying itself in the physical world, becoming more real with every flash. Her mind screamed. There had to be another way. There had to be something she could do. She couldn't keep fighting it the way they had been. The more she fought, the closer it got. Her breath hitched as the girl finally moved. She took a step toward the figure, slowly, methodically, with no hesitation, no fear. Her hand lowered the camera as she closed her eyes, almost as if accepting something Maggie didn't understand. "No," Maggie whispered, panic rising in her chest. "Don't do that." But it was too late. The girl's eyes opened, and they were empty, hollow, vacant, as though something had drained all life from them. She took another step forward. The air around her shimmered, like the space itself was distorting, warping. The figure, no longer a shadow, moved toward her with purpose. And then, nothing. In an instant, the garden fell completely silent. Maggie stood there, heart thumping in her chest, her eyes darting around the garden. The wind had stopped. The trees no longer swayed. The figure was gone. The girl was gone. The hotel was still there, but something had changed. The weight of the air was different now. Heavier, darker. Maggie's breathing quickened, and she turned back to the door, feeling her way toward it. Her heart was racing as she gripped the handle once again. This time the door opened, and the lobby was empty. Maggie's hand trembled on the door handle as she stepped inside, the heavy wooden door creaking shut behind her with a chilling finality. The lobby was eerily silent, its once comforting atmosphere now oppressive. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak of the floorboards louder, as if the hotel itself was alive, watching her every move. Her breath was shallow, her chest tight, and her legs felt like lead as she stepped further into the cold, dimly lit space. She had expected chaos, a struggle, something, but now all she felt was the weight of the silence pressing in on her, suffocating her. The air tasted stale, tinged with the scent of something ancient, something decayed. The walls seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, as though they were alive, breathing in time with her own panicked heartbeats. Where had the girl gone? And the figure. Maggie's mind spun with the questions, but they all seemed meaningless now. Everything in her was screaming to leave, to run, but her body refused to move. She was trapped, trapped in the hotel, trapped in its story, its curse. The soft click of footsteps from behind made Maggie freeze. Her heart skipped a beat. Slowly, cautiously, she turned around, her eyes darting to the reception desk where Ivy stood, her face partially obscured by shadows, but her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Ivy," Maggie said, her voice barely a whisper, thick with dread. "Where's the girl, and what's happened to the figure? Why is everything so quiet?" Ivy didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at Maggie with that same unreadable expression, her lips curling into that same unnerving, knowing smile. There was something in her eyes, something that was both familiar and terrifying. It was as if she knew everything, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. "The hotel chooses who it allows to leave," Ivy finally said, her voice calm, detached, as though she were discussing something trivial. "And it is never in a hurry. Once you've seen what you were never meant to see, there is no going back. It's like the photos, Maggie. You've taken one, haven't you?" Maggie's pulse quickened. The photos, of course, how could she have forgotten? In every photo the figure was there, lurking in the background, an ever-present reminder of the hotel's twisted grip on her. The man in the suit, Charles Holloway. But now it was worse. Now the hotel was alive, and it was hungry. "I haven't taken any pictures," Maggie said, her voice barely audible. "Not since the girl, but I don't understand. What does it want? What does it need from me?" Ivy took a slow step forward, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. "It wants you, Maggie," she said softly, her tone almost wistful, as if she were talking about something lost. "It wants everyone who stays here. It feeds on them, on their memories, their fears, their very souls." Maggie shook her head, trying to understand, but the girl, she was alive. She had the camera. She was taking pictures, and now she's gone. Is she gone? Is she gone? Ivy's lips twitched. "No, she's not gone, Maggie. She's exactly where she's always been, where we all are. She's part of the hotel now, just like you will be." Maggie's stomach lurched. The words hung in the air, suffocating her like a thick fog closing in on her chest. Part of the hotel, what did that mean? What happened to the people who disappeared here? Were they still here too? Were they trapped like she was? It wasn't just a building, it was a prison, a living, breathing entity that consumed anyone who came close enough. "You have to understand, Maggie," Ivy continued, her voice low and almost sympathetic. "You're already part of it. You've seen him, you've taken the photos, it has marked you, it has chosen you." The truth of Ivy's words sank in like a heavy stone. She had taken the photo, the very thing that had sealed her fate. The camera was the key, the thing that brought the hotel's curse into focus. And now the figure was here, in the real world, no longer just a shadow. It was alive, walking the halls, claiming those who dared to look. Maggie stumbled backward, the weight of realization crashing down on her. She had been chosen, but for what? What would happen to her now? "You see," Ivy continued, her voice almost tender, "the hotel doesn't just take your soul, it makes you part of its story. You become a part of it, a memory, locked in place, forever. Just like everyone else who has stayed here." Maggie's mind raced, her thoughts a jumble of horror and disbelief. She felt like she was drowning, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. The walls of the lobby seemed to press in around her, closing off any chance of freedom. She looked back toward the door, the one she had just entered through, but it was now a wall of solid, impenetrable wood. There was no escape, no way out. "I'm not like the others," Maggie said, her voice shaking. "I won't stay here. I won't become part of this place." Ivy's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "It's not about whether you want to stay, Maggie. It's about whether you can leave, and you can't. Not now." Maggie's hands trembled as she clutched the camera tighter, the cold metal digging into her skin. She could feel its power, its curse, seeping into her very being, and that was when she saw it. The faint flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, the figure. It was there, standing at the far end of the lobby, its shadowy form barely discernible in the low light. But Maggie knew it was real. It was no longer just a blur in a photo. It was standing right there, waiting for her to move, waiting for her to make the next mistake. Its presence was suffocating, an unspoken command that demanded her attention. "You can't hide," Ivy whispered, her voice barely audible now, as the figure slowly advanced toward Maggie. "It will find you. It always does." Maggie's breath caught in her throat as she took a step back, her mind reeling. The figure's head turned ever so slightly, its gaze locking onto her, and she knew that this was it. This was the moment she couldn't run from. It wasn't just the figure she had to escape. It was the hotel itself, the camera. She had to do something. She had to break the curse. But how? Maggie's hands clenched around the camera, her knuckles turning white, the metal cold against her skin. The figure, still in the far corner of the lobby, took a slow step forward. It wasn't like before. No flickering, no distortion. It was fully real now. It was here. The air felt colder, heavier, as though the very walls of the hotel were squeezing in on her. Ivy stood still, watching Maggie, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were fixed on the figure, and there was no fear in her gaze, only resignation. "You can't outrun it," Ivy said softly, as if speaking to someone who had already given up. "It's not about the camera. It's not about running. You've already seen it. That's all it needs." The truth of Ivy's words hit Maggie like a blow. It wasn't just the figure that had come for her. It was the hotel, the curse, the cameras, the photos. They were all part of the trap. The figure didn't just want her to be a part of its story. It needed her soul, her memories, her presence. Maggie's heart hammered in her chest. The hotel had been trapping people for generations, feeding on them, devouring their essence, turning them into part of its twisted, eternal story. But Maggie, she wasn't ready to accept that. She couldn't accept it. The figure took another step forward, its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, locked on Maggie. It was so close now that she could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on her chest. It wasn't just in the lobby anymore. It was in her head, in her soul. And then, with a sudden sharp movement, it lunged. A scream tore from Maggie's throat, but it was cut short when her feet left the floor. She felt herself being lifted off the ground, her body yanked toward the figure, as if it were pulling her by some invisible force. Her vision blurred, and she couldn't breathe. She tried to scream again, to struggle, but her body wouldn't obey. The figure's hands, or what could be called hands, gripped her tightly. Its fingers were cold like ice, and they felt as though they were digging into her very skin, pulling her soul from within her. Her mind screamed in terror, but there was no escaping. The figure's touch wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, like it was reaching into her deepest thoughts, dragging out every memory, every fear, every hope. "You've seen too much," Ivy's voice echoed, cold and distant now. "You're already a part of it. You can't escape. It won't let you." But Maggie didn't give up. She refused to give up. She couldn't let it win. She couldn't let it claim her. Not when she knew what it did to the others. She remembered the girl with the camera. She had fought to the very end. And Maggie realized now what she had to do. Her eyes locked on the camera in her hands. The very thing that had cursed her. The flashes, the photos, the light. It had always been about the light. With every ounce of strength left in her, Maggie brought the camera up to her face. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, but she didn't hesitate. She aimed it at the figure, her finger hovering over the shutter button. And then she pressed it. The flash of light was blinding, searing the space around her. For a moment, everything was white, and in that instant she felt it, a shift in the air, a sudden release. The figure's grip loosened, and it howled, a sound that rattled her bones, a sound that could have been nothing human. Maggie felt herself falling, crashing to the floor. Her vision spun as she lay there gasping for breath. The hotel groaned around her, as if the very foundation of the building was shuddering under the weight of what had just happened. For a moment she thought it was over. The figure was gone, but the silence didn't last long. When Maggie opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the lobby. She was standing in the same place, but everything around her had changed. The walls were cracked, the floor was uneven, and the shadows seemed to stretch impossibly long, as though they had come alive. And then she saw it, the camera lying just in front of her. It had fallen from her hands when she'd hit the floor, but it wasn't just any camera anymore. The lens was shattered, the edges scorched, and when she looked closer, Maggie saw something more chilling. The images in the photographs, every photo, showed something new, something horrifying. The photos weren't just of the hotel. They were of the people who had been here before her, people who had never left. There were dozens of faces, all frozen in fear, all staring back at her from the photo. But in every single one, there was one extra person, one shadowy figure lurking just behind them. The same figure that had been haunting her, that had followed her through every hallway, every corner. It had been there all along, even in the moments when she thought she was alone. The photos showed them, the lost souls, the ones who had come before her, just like the girl in Charles Holloway, all now part of the hotel. And in the last photograph, at the very bottom, was a new figure, Maggie herself. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. She was the last one, the final victim, but the figure, the dark shadow, stood just behind her, in the photo. And this time, it wasn't flickering. It was solid, real, a part of her. Maggie's body trembled as she backed away, the weight of the truth crashing down on her. She was no longer just a visitor. She had become part of the hotel, just like every other soul that had ever wandered through its doors. And somewhere in the distance, the faintest whisper echoed through the halls, a soft and endless sound. You will never leave.